the truest form of creativity is the sketch.
Is only really achievable by sketching.
Having taught thousands of students, I've never met one that couldn't sketch.
I think there's a lot of pressure on students these days to utilize modern technology, CAD and AI.
It's got to be quick. You need to knock something like this out in a half a day.
Clients expect designers to be able to sketch well.
This sketch would never have got in front of the client.
Quite a simple axonometric sketch was all that was needed to convey that to the client.
We're not talking about artworks, and this is not about creating artworks. As we know, this is about a process. Okay, welcome to podcast number 4. This is called Can't Sketch, Can't Design. I'm joined by Nick Taylor and Glen Thomas for this particular episode. So before we get started, let's introduce ourselves. So over to you first, Nick.
I'm Nick Taylor. I graduated, I think, in '93 from Cardiff. So I did the interior architecture, and I had the pleasure of being tutored by both Mikes, actually, and Paul, and of course Patrick. I've run my own business, but I currently work for the Design Solution. So we're a London practice for the last 20 years. When I was researching this podcast, I went through my old folios, and I found something from when I was at school, which read, "Nick, this is still very, very sloppy on my art homework." So look, the one message I've got is this is not about being Picasso, because I certainly am not. So that's me.
Cool. Nice one. Glen next.
Hi everyone, I'm Glen Thomas. I'm founder and director of Glen Thomas Architecture here in Cardiff. I studied in Liverpool, a little bit later than you, Nick. 1995, I would have achieved BA honours in architecture. Did a year out in practice in Cardiff, became a bit impatient, so set up my own business in London for about 8 years. We're now established, we're based in Cardiff again, which is where I grew up. We are quite a small design-led architectural practice focusing on contemporary architecture, one-off kind of high-end, right the way through to multiple affordable housing. I'm industry advisor to Cardiff Metropolitan University, which is an honour, and I'm also a guest lecturer there.
Great. Thanks, Glen. So me, Craig Thomas, I did my degree in interior architecture. I think I finished in '96, so we're quite close together. I did a master's in fine art. I then did a PhD that was creating sort of environments that were very much kind of trying to elicit an emotional response, a very specific, precise response from those environments. I was an interior practitioner for about 18 years, and I've taught interior design and interior architecture for 20 plus years. And sketching's been ever present throughout the whole of that. None of that could be possible without sketching. I've recently set up Interior Design Evolution. And my passion, I suppose, is to create interiors and help people create interiors that make somebody feel something very kind of powerfully and potently. That's kind of my passion. How does it make me feel is my kind of key word, I suppose, in that. Okay, so yeah, let's get started. So as I said, this is podcast number 4, Can't Sketch, Can't Design. So I'm just going to share screen. Yeah, Can't Sketch, Can't Design. So this really podcast grew out of sort of Nick, really. The first podcast we had, he asked us a question at the end. I'm paraphrasing. I think you said something like, Nick, where are all the great sketches gone? Believing that, if you can't sketch, you can't properly design. And then you finish that off by saying, I employ people that sketch well. So it's a kind of call to arms for people to kind of sketch well. In a separate conversation, we had a conversation where Glen's sitting now, and Glen was kind of waxing lyrical about sketch and all sorts of different types and how influential and how that was a massive part of Glen's design process. So that's sort of where the whole thing's come from. So you can see on the screen a range of sketches, and we sketch right the way through that design process. It's a kind of an essential skill, we would say, for all designers. When we think of the design process, if you haven't seen diagrams like this before, This is what the design process looks like on paper. So this is kind of how we kind of teach it, if you like. It's nice and neat, and there's a series of stages: concept, scheme, which is the development bit, and then communication. So all the kind of presentation drawings. In actual fact, it's a lot messier than that. But we kind of sketch right the way through this process. Some people do more at the start because that's the kind of concept sketches, but you can sketch right the way through, right to when you're on site with the contractors as well. So we'll kind of try to unpick some of that stuff. So through that kind of design process, there's a kind of concept sketches, development, and then the more presentation kind of communication sketches. It's very important that, when we talk about sketching, we're talking about all different drawing types. So it's not just that one sketch that you kind of do, which is a kind of visual or a kind of diagrammatic sketch of what the project is on that napkin at the end of the project. Sketching is a kind of fundamental process right the way through, and we use all the drawing types. So we use plans, sections, axos, visuals, all that thing feeds back into the model and then back into the sketches. So, it's a very, very important kind of part of that process. What we've got a series of slides now that Nick's going to show, and then Glen's going to show a series after that. It's going to be fairly loose, so we'll be very conversational. So the slides may go by, and then another one we may spend 10 minutes on. Who knows? It's kind of a very fluid kind of conversation. So over to you, Nick, first up.
Thank you, Craig. Okay. So I'm just going to start by just saying from a slightly contradictory remark. So yes, of course, we could sketch all the way through design process. Do we do that? No. We just, in our business, we are a retail design. Okay. So 99% of what we do is retail. We use sketching where it's commercially makes sense for us in our studio. At the very beginning of the process, when the client comes to us with a project, they'll say to us, okay, in this case, we've got this VVIP lounge that we want you to design for us. And one of the first things we will do is, well, probably say, right, we're going to come down to Jeddah or wherever it is and go and sort of live and breathe it for a week or so and exchange thoughts with the client. But as well as that, we will do our own sort of researching. So obviously going on the internet and sort of benchmarking what's out there. What does sort of lounge design in this case look like globally, really? And then we'll try to sort of draw into that. What, in this case, what is luxury about? Not any old luxury, it's not British luxury, it's not American. It's what is it in the region? So it's sort of trying to define something quite nebulous, but draw it together with a sort of a sense of place. So sense of place is something, it's probably another podcast, but it's something we talk about probably day in, day out. And it's what our clients sort of buy into. So the sketching begins. So, and you'll hear me say this probably quite a few times over the next hour. For us, and this is probably different for you, Glenn, but for us, the foundations of almost all our projects is the plan. And at the beginning of the plan, so prior to any sort of hard lines, it's the bubble diagram. So it's literally, before the iPad was invented, this has been me sat there with a tracing pad and a fat marker defining bubbles or zones or worlds, whatever you want to call them, of commerce. And that commerce, all of that sort of what we're seeing there, coffees, tea, spice, this is a project out in Jamaica, nothing to do with the previous slide. All of that information will have come from the client. The client will say, Nick, these are the things that we want in the space. This is the size of them. This is how we see sales. So our job in the beginning is to take that sort of data and translate it into these bubbles. And the way we almost always do that is by hand. As I say, back in the day, it'd be with a marker. These days, we'd do that on an iPad. So that's the sort of the very, very beginnings of our process. And so from those bubbles, sort of on the left there, we'll move into something that's a bit more defined. So on the right-hand side there, you've got these worlds. So in this case, it's a duty-free store. So there's perfume, cosmetics, liquor. WJA means watches, jewelry, and accessories, and some other smaller categories there. And we'll start drilling down into what are the other things within those worlds. And those worlds, for us, all have their own identity, their own look and feel, albeit it's all within a global design language, which just sort of glues everything together in a homogeneous interior design. So these pages are very typical of just about all projects we do. Top on the left-hand slide there, on the top right, those numbers will have been that type of raw data that the client will say, well, Nick, we need 700 square meters of perfume cosmetics because that drives X amount of sales and the margin on those sales is Y. So it's a very much commercially driven brief, which drives the planning. And as I say, sketching is absolutely fundamental to doing that. And why is it fundamental? Well, the reason is, and I'm sure we'll drill down into this later, but for us, in a retail situation, this is about flowing a lot of people from A to B. So in an airport, and again, I didn't say it in the intro, but the vast majority of what we do is in airports. We're the people who make duty-free stores, a bit like an IKEA experience, whether you like it or hate it. That's what makes airports money globally. So moving people through a retail space, a lot of people, is a really sort of careful and considered and balanced thing that we have to deal with day in and day out. You don't annoy people. At the same time, you want everyone to go past every single product because you get those unexpected purchases as well as the planned purchases. All of those sort of thoughts, that sort of the practicality of moving people through space, the commerciality of which worlds are where, which brands are where within those worlds, which promotions, those red dots on the plan on the right are promotional spaces. Where are they in the journey? Are they right at the beginning? Are they midway? Are they on the main walkway? What drives people from that main walkway to the back wall? So all these considerations are happening probably simultaneously, a bit like spinning plates in my mind anyway, when I'm sort of sketching these sort of plans through. And I firmly believe that this level of sort of thought process is only really achievable by sketching. Okay. There's other levels beyond this, which of course we go into CAD, and you'll see that in a moment.
Before we go to the next one, Nick, I just want to kind of drill down a little bit. I'm always like really intrigued of how people get to the point where they make the first sketch. There's got to be some data gathering thing
Yes.
that sparks something, this
Yes.
kind of literally this spark in the mind to then put pencil to paper or whatever,
Yes.
however you sketch.
Yes.
So you have this sense of place is obviously important depending on where the airport is. This idea of the schedule that you have to place within that kind of host kind of shell through the project brief. At what point are you layering these bubble diagrams up like what we see in now onto the existing kind of host building plan? Is that pretty immediately, or do you try?
Immediately.
Right.
And the reason it's immediately because normally our clients give us next to no time to do these things. It drives back to the sort of commerciality of retail. So what will happen is, yes, the sense of place, yes, the dreaded Excel sheet with a million brands and square meters and sales projections and all that sort of stuff. But also we will receive an outline plan most of the time, or a CAD plan. So a shell space to say, right, that's where all that stuff is going. And immediately once we've got those, or the second two things at least, we will start doing this. And within the first half a week, 2, 3 days, we will have a few of these diagrams saying, okay, what we could do based on what you've told us, based on what we've just researched, the sense of place and all of those things. What we think is perfume and cosmetics is better at the north of the plan on this particular one, but on this other one, we've explored it being on the east of the plan, and so on. So we'll look at different sort of arrangements
So Nick, you just going off the back of what Craig was saying, the initial stroke, the initial line on paper, are these flow diagrams clearly there? The intent is for circulation and location of things, but are they done to a scale or is this almost
Yes,
abstract?
it's definitely done to a scale. So I know, just because I've been doing it for the last 30 years, I know when I draw a bubble that it's 100 square meters or
Right.
whatever it needs to be. So there's a lot of intuitive thought,
Sure.
I suppose, not even, sort of gut feel is what Patrick would call it.
Hmm.
That's going on when I would be doing it, just because I've got a lot of experience of doing it. But yes, very, very immediate, Craig, on that point. Lots
Yeah.
of intuition, lots of multiple things going on in my head to try and arrive at a series of these things to give the client options. But out of those options, I'll be saying, well, actually, we've looked at all these options, and actually, this one's the way to go. And more often than not, we all agree because we know each other. So yeah, it's a discussion point, But as I say, it's the foundation for just about everything that we do.
But that thing that you talked about there, though, Nick, and I think it shouldn't be underestimated, and we should kind of bring it to the fore, is there's a knowledge base that you've built up over years and years and years and years that that to somebody that doesn't understand what you've done with that green kind of bubble on that
Yeah.
plan, that means something much more to
Yes.
you than what
Yes.
somebody else, because that the knowledge is all you're drawn off a knowledge base that is 20 years of experience or whatever it is, and then presumably the client sees some of this, they don't see some of this, so this for their eyes
So,
not.
so what will happen is my clients, the duty-free operators. So when you go to Heathrow through World Duty Free, that's my client, and they're owned by a much, much bigger business who's on the global stage. They know because they've been doing it also for 30 years. They know that what doesn't make sense is to have, for example, liquor at the beginning of the journey. Why doesn't it make sense? Well, because it weighs a lot, right? It's heavy. So people don't like lugging around things. So there are really simple things like that. Why are the fags where they are? Because smokers will sniff them out. So you put them in a dark area. So there are things there's industry intel, like I'm sure there is in all different industries, which we know because
Mm.
we've been doing it for a very long time. In parallel with that stuff, with those bubble diagrams, which typically I will often myself, I will typically do those bubble diagrams, probably because of that knowledge base we just touched on. In parallel with that, we'll start to be thinking, okay, let's say local food is a really big thing because we're in, I don't know, Jeddah, and it's all about dates and nuts, whatever it might be. And the clients told us that in the briefing, and we've gone, right. So we need to build a world around that seed of a thought. And within that world, in the center of it, as a hero, let's say, there is something architectural, which is a beacon, which is talking to me from a distance as a passenger going through this space and saying, here I am, I'm something different, I'm special, I'm local, I'm about nuts and dates, come and see, come and buy. So we will start. This particular one is not one of my sketches, I must say, but we will get people in who will do these sorts of sketches to sort of bring those seeds of aspiration or the client's vision together with our thoughts on it and bring those to life. I mean, coming back to the very beginning there, I mean, this is where the slight frustration is from my side, is that this sort of thing I was doing when I left university, and we just don't seem to have those people coming through. Everyone who's able to do it, the guy who did this, is at least 50 years old. So there just doesn't seem to be the young blood coming through who was able to do what we did when
Yeah.
we were in our 20s.
I think there's a lot of
That's it.
I think there's a lot of pressure on students these days to utilize modern technology, CAD and AI, everything's pushed to get that kind of
Sure.
sail, that kind of wholesome image, which is the flagship magazine shot
Yeah.
of the project, rather than to go through the process of exploration and curiosity of sketching. And I think
Yes.
that's the nature of this podcast, just to reiterate how important it is to begin at the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think
Absolutely. And it's not always, it's not, it sometimes is about the sketch being the final product, but in the case of what we're looking at on the screen, this is about thinking through the medium of sketching and thinking creatively. And that's the bit that I don't think we can lose sight of or lose. And I feel we're losing it. That's my frustration slash worry.
Yeah, well,
What with AI coming along, and we'll get into that a bit later, but it is a genuine concern for me, you know?
yeah, I think with CAD, it's definitely got its place. It's got huge advantages over drawing when it comes to realizing and modeling spaces. But we always say you've got to use it as a tool rather than a means to the end. CAD is very fixed, it's very static. Whereas sketching, I like to think of it as a kind of direct conduit between the mind and the paper. You're not
Yeah.
using a kind of third-party interpreter, which is what CAD is.
Yeah, absolutely. There's an immediacy about it. I
Yeah,
totally agree with you.
I think there's a pressure with students that feel like they're on a degree course. I need to leave with, I need to know Photoshop and Revit
for
and
sure.
SketchUp and V-Ray. And there's a certain amount of truth in that. And I think having taught, thousands of students, I've never met one that couldn't sketch, They can all sketch in a way that is useful to their project. We're not talking
Yeah,
about artworks, and this is not about
No.
creating artworks. As we know, this is about kind of a process of designing something, and they do feel that pressure, and they do it fantastic in first year. And as soon as the CAD and everything else kicks in, they tend to think it's a little bit kind of primitive, and hopefully if people watch this, they'll realize it's kind of not that way. But to come back to yours, Nick, I imagine this process is fairly similar in terms of the nuts and bolts of it, but you're looking for that kind of, as you call it, the seed, the uniqueness of something that gives you
Exactly.
this thing which we're looking at now. So there's a similar process, but the outcome is going to be very specific to what that design language is for that particular client.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Again, in our industry, it is all about that word uniqueness is absolutely key. There's a place for rollouts and cookie cutter approaches, the likes of what Starbucks and endless other brands did back in the day. But this is the opposite. Every single shop that we design needs to be different, even down to the point where you've got 10 of them just in Lisbon Airport. They will all need to have a difference, but have some sort of common glue to them. There's no cookie cutters sort of approach to things.
You see that there's different types of drawings here. There's the diagrammatic
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
There's like this sketch that we're looking at now is a little bit more finished, almost like
Yeah.
it's kind of now it's gone through the filters of the client and everybody else. Whereas those earlier ones we saw, particularly that initial one, the client's involved in those sketches. It's not finished. It isn't this
Yeah.
computer simulation that feels like oh, it's done. I haven't had a chance to kind of have my kind of opinion and add my kind of ideas to it if I was a client. But with sketching is this magical with that because it isn't finished,
Exactly. It leaves something to the imagination. You're dead right. I mean, this particular one, I mean, this is going back many, many years, but this is probably something that at the time we would have put it in front of the client, It would have probably formed a sketchbook of initial concept ideas, but the color, bringing that just a little, I mean, there's not much color there, but what will have happened? We've done the hand sketch, brought it into Photoshop, put a multiplied layer of color just to start picking out and giving depth and focus to that hand sketch. So it just adds a bit more information, a bit more focus, and a bit more, therefore, then to sort of describe to the client about what our thinking is at this stage. And then this is jumping right forward, probably to about pre-pandemic, I would have thought. This is one of my sketches. I told you I'm not Picasso.
The great sketch, Nick.
Well, thank you, but yeah, not a patch on yours. This is something. This is in Cancun. This sketch would never have got in front of the client. Never. This would have been something which we're probably really up against it, and we need to brief amazing team of guys who use 3D Max to start producing the really nice glossy stuff and the animations and the VR, all that sort of stuff. So this would have been an enabler to talk to the team internally and give them a sort of a starting point. It would need to be something where we've sort of said, right, make sure that when you squint after looking at this, that what you guys produce is pretty sort of similar. And it was, in fairness. We had this big rotunda digital with these sort of wishbone type structures holding it up and this central sort of display. Yeah, this wouldn't have gone outside of the studio.
That's quite interesting that we do sketches for different audiences, and I know we'll pick up some with Glenn as well. That some are internal, some we don't even show anybody. Some we show the design team, some we show the client. We sketch differently for contractors. But the other interesting thing when I look at this one is when you start to add, get multimedia, where you start add real things. So we recognize that person, we recognize the lipstick as real things. Then the sketch suddenly changes. It's not a sketch anymore. It's somewhere between these two worlds, which is an exciting place.
Exactly. It's one up from the previous slide, which was just bringing in the color and that sort of definition and focus. And this, you're dead right. This starts to focus in, what is that big surface up there? Well, clearly it's a sort of it's a digital screen. And this is again a sort of a step up where we start. It's a very simple sketch. There's not many lines on the page. When you look through that sketch, there's not many black lines there. But what this is one that I did. This is in Kansai Airport in Japan. What I would have done there is I would have brought it into Photoshop and then start to think about materiality. Grabbing concrete floors to underlay underneath that sketch and bring the flooring to sort of life. Grabbing copper beneath the word whiskey to start saying, well, the narrative here was that was a sort of a tasting bar for Japanese whiskies. So starting to pull real materials from the internet and underlaying it in a kind of, I suppose, like a photo montage or a collage type way. So it's quite, it feels quite loose still, I suppose, but it starts to give a look and feel, a flavor of that look and feel. And we can start pointing to that and saying, well, this is copper, this is concrete, this is charred wood, this is ribbed oak or whatever it is. This is multimedia in the ceiling. And we're starting to flick in a little bit of product, starting to hint at, but not, not going berserk. That's for later. That's for when the 3D modelers get involved. So giving that just that flavor at this stage, probably I will have shown the client in one of our interim meetings. It wouldn't have been something that went upstairs to the sort of top floor, but it would have been with the project manager. We would have been discussing our thoughts using this, and they start to get a good idea. The QS starts to get an idea about, right. So they're thinking about those sorts of materials. Right, okay, I know how much those sort of things cost. So he can start thinking, numbers, which is, again, part of the sort of the process of commercial reality.
But there's two important things there, Nick, isn't there? That you're producing something, as you said, it's coming to life for you. You can imagine, you can kind of smell it and all the rest of it it's very quick, it's photoshopped. And as you said, there's not many black lines here, but crucially, it allows the client to go, well, actually, does that have to be timber? Change it immediately. You haven't spent 3 days in front of a computer kind of generating this thing and getting the lighting right and everything else. It's beautifully kind of poised.
Yeah, and that's a really good point because again, when I was researching this podcast and looking back to the folio, I came across some. I was very into sort of 6B pencil and lots of cross hatching. I loved it. I spent days, weeks doing it when I was at Cardiff, and when I came out of university, I carried on, and I was pulled up very, very quickly. Nick, you cannot be spending days doing, one beautiful sketch with a 6B pencil. So, the reality is in practice, unfortunately, although I'd love to spend days and days, it's got to be quick. You need to knock something like this out in a half a day. There'll be lots of, behind this sketch. This won't be like me going at it one shot and it's done. I would have been working out the perspective, trying to get something feeling dynamic, trying to get enough elements in there. At the same time, I'm thinking about, well, what's the content? Do I need a whiskey bar? Do I need tobacco over there? Do I, what am I trying to say in the seat? So you're designing, you're sketching, you're thinking about the dynamic of the sketch to make it feel compelling and seductive. So there's a lot of things going on within a sketch like that, but it needs to be, you're dead right, it needs to be quick. And this is again jumping way back in time. These are my sketches, supermarket design. It's all about product. Product is king. Why are we in this retail space? To sell product. We're not selling ceilings, we're not selling floors, we're not selling gondolas, back walls. That's all the background. It's all about product. So again, in our world, when we get to visualization, the product's really got to pop and sort of come forward and be king. So this is using sketches for a little bit of a different use. This is where we've modeled the space. This is in Abu Dhabi. We'll make it black and white, and then we'll use that to over sketch and start to say, okay, this is some of the accent lighting. This is how we're going to deal with ambient lighting. These sort of reveals on these sort of arched openings left and right are going to be sort of back illuminated. We're going to have this decorative sort of crystal or Swarovski-esque sort of detail at a high level. So sketching over the top of 3D visuals is definitely something we do, certainly for lighting purposes.
And is that where it kind of ends for you then? Does the sketching end at this kind of storytelling phase pretty much?
It does. It does. For us, these days, we will bring all those things I've just talked about, and we will create something like this, which is the story, Island Luxury in this case. And this is where it ends. After this, we'll go into, into CAD, into 3D Max, Unreal Engine, virtual reality, all sorts of materiality starts coming in again, reversing those 3D visuals. It's quite a good way to sort of demonstrate that. There'll be a design book where it all comes together, sometimes gets printed, and then the tender pack. And this really is the end point for the design solution. We'll go up to the sort of tender, and we'll keep an eye on it. We'll have a say. We'll sign off rods, working drawings later after this. But in terms of output from our office, this is where it'll sort of end.
Quick question for you, Nick. This is fascinating, by the way, just to see the process. But when you say that's where the sketching ends, and you now go into this more kind of realistic, making it work pragmatically.
Yes.
Do you often refer back to sketches to kind of remind yourself of the essence of what this project is?
Yeah. Yes, we do. Yeah. And just from a personal satisfaction point of view, and sort of see where the seed came from. Yes, there's definitely an element of that. Again, it's not something in reality that the client's interested in. What they care about is, right, now you've built my space, does it look like the visual? They've gone past the sketch. They only then care about the visual. And this is again just the reality of the world we work in. So this is the seed of an idea which was in Abu Dhabi, and it was the jewelry island, which is this amazing sort of ribbon form. You see me here sort of sketching this idea out. And it was born out of the idea of pearl diving, which is a sort of thing that goes on to this day in the region. And we created this amazing structure here. We go into sort of building it very simply in CAD from that sketch.
Looks like one of Zaha Hadid's buildings.
It is a little bit, yeah. This is actually a KPF building. This is Abu Dhabi, the midfield terminal. This is
This is not real. That wasn't real, Abbott.
There you go. This is real. So this is how it is today. Pearl is born. So it really was. I mean, that was a feat of engineering. That was of Zaha's. Again, it's for a different podcast, but yes, that's a sort of, I suppose, our process from A to Z, from the thought to built.
You must get a real buzz. I know I certainly do when you see something that you've lived with and you've given birth to almost physically built on site. I mean, that's
absolutely
one of the best parts of
sure is
designing.
Sure is.
Cool. Okay, Glen, so we'll just go through your process now. So you started in a slightly different place here, which is cool.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think where to start, really. We'll go back to this sketch in a minute, but there's a lot of crossovers with Nick's process, but clearly, we are in different industries, so there's perhaps a slightly different approach to the way we deal with it. I mean, sketches, first of all, I'll say, are absolutely critical to the creative process. I mean, without it, we wouldn't have architecture, or we wouldn't have good architecture, at least anyway. To us, the most important thing before we even look at a screen or look at a survey, a site survey, a topographical, is to try and discover what the essence of that site is. What is that site all about, or what should it be? My philosophy is always the same. It's the design is already there. It's our job to kind of realize it in line form. It is already there. So what we do, the first thing we do when we get instructed by a client is to visit the site and spend some time there and sit in the grass. And it sounds very arty-farty, but it does prove successful results. It's about, as I say, discovering what the essence of that site is. So if you're sat, for example, in an open field, it might be a new build brief. You're sitting there noticing which way the sun's coming. You're looking out to the views. You're thinking, what views need to be framed. Where is the privacy aspect to the building? Where is the more open public aspect to the building? Where do you want light? Where do you want dark? What materials are surrounding you? Which way the wind's blowing? All of these things conceptually help you build up the form from the ground upwards. So I think sometimes it's tempting for designers to have a preconceived idea, maybe something they've seen in a magazine or on Pinterest. And they think, right, I'm going to use that. And there's nothing wrong with borrowing ideas and stealing them to a certain extent. But I think the design fundamentally, before having any idea of what that design, in my case, buildings, is going to look like, you have to get to the core of what that place is all about. We had a new build project in the Gower, and it was near to a beach, a stone beach. Now, we went to see that beach. We spent hours walking around it, taking photos to and from it. And just sitting there, we noticed that there was an iron ore kind of fracture in the stonework, if you like, that shot through and underneath the site of where this field or where the house is going to be. And you could just see this kind of iron ore line. Now, so what we did, the first thing, we sat on the site and we projected that line through the site. And we thought, right, this is going to be a corten, a weathered steel wall that cuts through the site on top of where this kind of fractured line of iron goes. From there, all the space is kind of arranged, from the private side of the bedrooms and the wet areas, the utility, the boot room. And then from the south side, where we wanted passive solar heat gain and there was more privacy, there's going to be lots of glass. So from that point, we've not put a pen to paper. We've not sketched. We've put everything aside. We're not even really looking at the client's brief. We're not looking at where rooms go. So opposite to what you were saying, Nick, where from a commercial aspect, you have to, from the outset, know where certain functions are going to go.
Yeah.
Here, we're just establishing the form, the concept, what I call the hook. So with this, we called it the ochre house, this one line of ochre that cut through the site. That was what it was all about. And I remember doing a watercolor painting of getting my watercolors out and finding the richest kind of ochre watercolor I could find. And on thick cartridge paper and a very wet brush, just putting a smear of the ochre as a one line through the drawing. And then from that, I started sketching volumes and spaces. And from that, I used blue to indicate which was going to be glass and a black for which was going to be solid. So at this stage, it's almost still very abstract and very conceptual, but that drawing remains on the side of my desk as the hook. So whenever we're kind of spinning off and you have problems, which inevitably you do throughout the whole process with builders and clients, you always got that to refer back to, which is why I was mentioning it to you, Nick. It's critical that that's what the project is all about. And there's a poetry to it. And that's kind of sometimes allows you to have a more relaxed and unique approach throughout the whole project. So here, this is a rather beautiful, I'd say, 18th century house in West Wales. The client wanted us to do an extension out the back. Now, the first thing any architectural designer will do will draw a box out the back. Is it going to be flat roof or pitched roof? And that's kind of it, really. Now, because the house was quite big and it had a number of sort of 1970s add-ons, a series of kind of annexes upon annex and PVC conservatories, the first thing we do was we did a sketch where we stripped everything off, and we literally drew almost like a child's house of this 2-story pitch-roof stone cottage. And that's what everything was reduced to. We demolished everything else. From that point, we decided, well, the house is actually quite deep, so we need to get light into the core. So the top right-hand side was one of the first sketches we did, which was just trying to illustrate in my mind how on the ground floor, by pulling that extension away, so very kind of untraditional as an extension, we created a central courtyard to the project. That developed further with the isometric you can see to the left, just showing how these volumes interplay and interact. From the first floor, you can look down into the courtyard. From all the rooms, you can look through this kind of planted courtyard to the other rooms. And that was what I refer to as the hook, this courtyard which formed the centre to the project.
I think what's interesting there, Glenn, is these are very different outcomes. We know that's what's exciting about this podcast, that you both had very different practices, but actually when you map them onto each other, Nick's mentioned sense of place. You've mentioned essence of sight. Nick mentioned seed. You've mentioned hook.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, these things map out beautifully, but the outcome is completely different.
Sketching can provide a catalyst for, innovation, creativity. And it's that kind of lack of boundaries that you have when you're sketching. Everything's completely free. We don't have constraints like we do in CAD when we're drawing things to scale. It's very loose, and it's I don't want to use the word spiritual, but it's kind of the truest form of creativity is the sketch. And that is the seed, as you just said, or the hook. This is a house actually that's being built. It's about 3 or 4 months into the construction process. It's on the coast, again in the Gower. So here, there was an existing house. It was a 1970s house of no kind of architectural importance or merit. Certainly would be very unsustainable to retain in terms of heat loss and materials. So we made quite an early decision to demolish the house and construct what was to be a passive standard contemporary home for the family who were moving from abroad actually back to Wales. The first thing we did was draw this line, this anchor, which we have follows through quite a few of our projects. Now that line is what you see on the approach. Now we're going to use local stone that was demolished from the house to create this. So reusing all the stone to create this almost like garden wall. It was supposed to be on like a Victorian garden wall. The entrance was going to be very defined with the first floor bedrooms just cantilevering over this wall, but very kind of private. It's north facing, it's facing the highway. So immediately when we're doing these sketches, and you can see the one below, there's hardly any glazing. So both from a heat loss perspective and a privacy perspective, that was logical for this project. So this sketch was really important to me, and this was one that we would have shown the clients. This is what you see on the approach. The clients told us that they were very private people. They didn't want a big show-offy house with double height glass atriums and entrances. So this was all about form and to say how these forms kind of interplay and overlap. So we got burnt timber Suzuki band cladding on the first floor and cast concrete on the left, and then this stone wall below. Actually, it's quite interesting with the concrete wall on the top left of that sketch. We thought, well, how can we make this respond to context? How can we make this, rather than just importing some panels in from anywhere? We were discussing with the client about having cast concrete, taking the cement out and using fly ash so it's a sustainable material, but getting the kids to go down to the beach and collecting shells and crushing it up and putting it into the concrete mix. And so this sketch was about materiality and form, which was critical to this project. And hopefully we'll have some finished images probably in about 6 months.
So part of that process then, Glenn, so you're showing this sketch down below. And again, we talked about how, sketches allow kind of the client in there to say, well, can't this be slightly kind of taller than that? And they're involved. Talk to us about the process of the two illustrations kind of above. What's the medium in those? Are they sketched and then taken into various different things, or?
No, so what's interesting, we would never show the client just the sketch on the bottom. That sketch on the bottom would form part of our first presentation, which would be establishing a narrative for that building. So we'll be almost building them up from the very initial sketch, which this would have been one of the very initial sketches, through to much more looser, but still not accurate in terms of perspectives. And at that point, we haven't gone on to CAD. I would have gone on to see the site area. So in my head, and Nick, you mentioned just where your experience comes from after sort of 20, 30 years, when you're sketching, you've got an idea of scale in your head, but it's still very much conceptual. We're not being bound by the constraints of the site at this point. We're trying to establish what the essence of this site is. So The presentation, Nick, in answer to your question, would start with the sketches, and it would be heavily sketch-based, the first presentation, because that's really giving the client an idea just organically how this design that they're going to see at the end of the presentation, how it's come about, what's the story. The worst thing we could do is present the two top images, early on in the presentation, because, where's it come from? Why? Why have we got all that glass? Why have we got a green roof? Why have we hardly got any windows facing that direction, So the volumetric studies, the sketches, the loose perspectives, they all form probably the first third of any presentation. We then start looking at CAD and then start looking at scale, and we then start applying that and doing more technical 2-point perspectives, the traditional sort of architects, 2 or 3-point perspectives. So it's then starting to get a scale, which we'll come on to in a few slides after this one.
It really just triggers something in my mind on that previous slide that if you go along to a client, I can think of a few times where we've gone along with a fully sort of polished render, and it's a sort of ta-da moment.
Yeah.
And the client sort of felt, yeah, I don't really want that. It gave them too much. It didn't give them any room to input, or the sketch still allows something to the imagination. So
yeah, 100%, Nick. If you did just show them the final render, whether that's through SketchUp or through Revit or whatever it's from, they're going to immediately kind of question things. And
exactly,
that's a negative thing. As the seed of negativity has entered their head, because why? What is this? What am I looking at?
Yes.
You have to build up the story in order for that final image to mean something. They still might not like it, but our job is to take them along the narrative.
Had a few of those,
So this sketch here kind of very briefly shows that. So from an initial sort of napkin sketch on the left there, well, just going back to give you some context. So this was just outside of Cardiff in the countryside, very rural location, a stunning 18th century cottage. Beautiful. Now, the clients wanted to take down some 1970s awful additions, and they wanted a 2-story extension. Now, anybody that's done work on an old cottage knows that a 2-story extension, because of the ceiling heights we now have, we don't use sort of 2.1 meter cottage ceiling heights, that roof line is going to be higher than the eaves of the cottage. So with this one, it was very important to separate the two. So the sketch on the left was about the idea of the stone remaining, obviously the existing cottage, hacking off the render that had been applied without line render. It wasn't breathing. The building really needed to be exposed to stone again. So we did that, and almost that was a conservation project. We leave that alone, and any new addition, the idea that it was going to delicately fold like paper around the house, and it'd be seen as subservient. And from the other side of the house, you don't really see this extension at all, or from the street side. The views at the bottom are purely private from the client side. So we called this project Stone Fold because we wanted the idea of paper folding around stone, and also coincidentally, or where it's derived from, the name Faldegerig, it translated as stone fold, quite literally. So that was quite a poetic name from both sides, the concept and the actual name, the historical name of the project. So here we show a sketch. We then show, still at kind of abstract level, how that would be on CAD. So we're now trying to move that into scale. That then gets drawn up on Google SketchUp. We look at basic sort of clay renders. The architecture here was very about, simplicity. We are very influenced in modernism, where each plane is independent to the other. So here you can see on the bottom left, the flat roof of the single-story extension is separated from the elongated stone wall and with a high-level strip of glazing. So there's a kind of honesty and form with this building that we felt was important. The first floor was the bedroom, and those windows splayed to encapsulate a stunning view across the countryside.
I think it's really illustrated well on this slide that, there would have been no doubt, many different sketches top left to merge before that technical drawing on the top kind of right. The client's involved, you're making changes before you get to that clay model down the bottom, and then they feel like they've contributed as part of that kind of team. On top of that, I think clients expect designers to be able to sketch well.
They do, absolutely. But it's that word well, isn't it, that's subjective. And it brings us back to the title, of this podcast. Can't sketch, can't design. Now, people may be put off by that, thinking, well, I can design, but I'm not the best sketcher or the best drawer. Now, can't sketch, I think possibly could change to doesn't sketch. If I don't sketch, I can't design. Because, the sketching is important to yourself, fundamentally more so, evoking what that project's going to be. If you can do perspectives, and this is something that's technical and people can learn. You don't have to be a natural artist or
Yeah,
painter.
absolutely.
You can learn those things. 2-point perspectives, fairly straightforward. There are lots of tutorials online now. There's a
I
tape.
wanted to, I had exactly the same. Just before we came on, I just was thinking about this, and I thought about there was a guy, Dr. Ching. Do you remember?
Yes.
Right. So Dr. Ching, for those people who are watching this, it was an architect. He had a number of amazing books. They're probably online these days.
Mm.
His architectural drawing in those editions. Yeah, exactly. They.
This is the
Th-
big one that we used to.
This is that's the one. I remember exactly. And there's probably other iterations,
Of
but I mean
course, I
that's
remember that. But yeah, that was as part of the reading list on the architecture course.
very. I mean,
Totally
I
forgotten about
find
that.
that it's inspirational for me.
Yeah.
What inspired me back in those days was morphosis. I don't know if you came across those
Yes. Yeah.
guys.
Yeah. Daniel Libeskind, Morphosis.
Libeskind,
These were all people that were heavily influenced
yes.
conceptual architecture side. Of course, they hadn't built a building then. All you saw
No,
were
no, they didn't.
tutorials.
Absolutely. But the
Daniel Liebeskind's
drawings,
drawings were stunning,
stunning.
absolutely beautiful, and they're heavily come from kind of Russian constructivism and things like that. So they were spatial explorations way before he even built one building, which was the Jewish
Yes.
Museum,
There you
actually.
go, Craig. Yes.
It was very scary, Ching's drawings, and I
Yeah,
think Glenn's
Oh, really?
absolutely correct. And we have talked about this, that when we say can't sketch, we don't mean, we're not talking about artworks. We're talking about this is part of a process to get you from A to B to C
absolutely.
to
Yeah,
D.
Is
sure.
it confident? Is it that we're not instilling a sense of confidence in young designers,
Yes,
maybe?
yeah, I think so. I think there's too much pressure for the final object to be of such high quality that they almost feel that they A, haven't got time to do the sketches, and B, are they going to be critiqued because are they not fantastic? Well, in my mind, if I had a portfolio come and land on my desk from somebody looking for work experience or part one or whatever, I wouldn't be looking at the quality of the sketch and whether that's true
No.
perspective. I'd be looking at how free it is, how imaginative it is, and how that's developed into the final scheme. And that needs to be shown as part of the story to show where's this come from. If you've just picked a scheme and gone straight onto the CAD, then you've lost the whole concept of the creative process. It is, as I say, it is critical.
It's interesting though that we've all said in our conversations over the last 2 weeks, and Nick has even said it in this podcast, that I can't sketch. So there's another little thing going on there that people, when we look at other people's sketches, it's like, oh, their sketches are better than mine. But
Yeah, which is not
it's
about
about,
at all.
yeah, it's about the process. I
I
mean,
mean,
how did you do these ones, Glenn? I mean, these ones are fantastic. I'm imagining you sitting there and it's raining and then it's windy and then the sun comes out and you got, a little flask and you draw, glass
little
of wine.
tartan flask, little tasseled rug. Yeah, that's
That's
it.
the one.
A little fishing tent. um, yeah, these ones. I carry a drawing pad around with me all the time, and it's a point I always make. If I'm doing a lecture or whatever, always carry a drawing pad because you're going to see things which aren't related to a project you're working on or anything. But it's that immediacy when you see something beautiful. Get your drawing pad out, sketch it, and you'll have that forever. So I've got a small one which is about 10 centimeters by 5 centimeters with cartridge paper, and I use that for some of my holiday sketches, which you saw a few slides back. But with this, I'll have a sketch pad. I've been doing it for so long that I don't need to draw the perspective points. I'll draw a dot on the paper, and by eye you can just bring all of those perspective points back to that dot. This is a single point perspective, and it's a 2-point perspective. And you can loosely sketch out the lines of that, and then you fill them in with black ink. But the beauty of sketching, and I think this shows it, is it's an organic process. If you drew that up on CAD or if you drew a technical, rotoring 0.2 ink pen drawing of that, yes, it's great for a contractor or a client, but the looseness of a pen or charcoal or whatever it is you're using, certainly with a project like this, which is embedded into the landscape, it creates a far softer visual approach. And I think if you keep looking back on that, which we certainly will with these projects, that's the kind of essence. This is a step further than the concept sketch. This is somewhere between the 3-line, concept that means nothing to anybody but you, and when you're starting to think about presenting to the client. But it's still loose at this stage. I still haven't gone on to CAD. I haven't drawn a room or a plan or a sink or a kitchen. this is still very much loose between those two stages.
So let me ask a question then. So this is a tough question because when you sort of, get your own kind of processes and you hone your own processes, you tend to push that kind of that awareness of what you're doing and you're relying on that kind of intuition. What are you thinking about when you're doing these sketches? For me, I'm trying to get into a sort of altered state. I'm trying to focus on things so I'm not focusing on all the things. There's
Yeah.
definitely a kind of a zoning in on less things. And I
Yeah.
use this kind of circus analogy where I'm in the moment and it's very subjective and all imagination and everything is kind of firing and it's drawing off this kind of knowledge base that I've built up. But then there's a certain moment where I'm outside of that. So I want to be the fire breather. I want to be the kind of lion tamer and the kind of trapeze artist for as much as I can be in that zone. And I do think that's a kind of an addictive kind of
Yeah.
zone to be in. But also then I need to be the audience and look back outside and be much more objective. How does your process work as you're sketching these things out?
It's quite a hard question. It's interesting because with architecture and with a lot of things, certainly with things you do, Nick, there's so many facets to what the client's expecting. You need to understand the structure. You need to make it physically work. You need to have a fundamental knowledge of kind of building, just a basic knowledge, but certainly a knowledge. If you approach sketching with all of the weight of that, which I think is what you're alluding to, it's hard to reduce what you're trying to do to a minimum. So I'd like to say some fancy answer to that, like, yes, it's all about meditation and, focusing on the moment and not being confused by the noisy world around you. But no, the simple answer is I just really love sketching. I just really enjoy it.
I have a slightly different take on it. Normally, if I'm doing sketching, it means we're in a bad place. It means
Right.
we couldn't get our normal sketcher on board. And it means Nick, do some sketching because there's two or three of us who can do it. But
Yeah.
it's normally like
Yeah.
3 in the morning and it's the day before the presentation. We've got to pull something out of the bag. So
Yeah. We've all
sometimes it can be a little bit painful. I mean, we don't,
yeah.
as I said earlier, I mean, often don't have the luxury of time. So we're slightly up against things in that respect. I don't mind admitting sometimes I struggle with it. You really, you're fighting with the sketch. Oh, it's not looking, as I said earlier on that Japanese project. Sometimes you're going, God, it's not dynamic. It just doesn't feel right. And I mean, again, going back before iPads, I would end up with a pile of A3 sheets of tracing next to my all around my desk.
Yeah.
I'd be tearing I'd be tearing corners off, shifting little sketches, the bits that worked, sort of trying to underlay them, and it would be a battle.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah.
get that. And that perspective that I just shown before this slide, that may not have been the first one. And I think it goes against something that Picasso once said, that the first sketch is always the best one. I do kind of disagree with that somewhat because
Yes.
I sketch all the time and I do find it quite meditative actually, but I have to be in the zone to do it.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to start sketching a concept when I've just come back from a meeting with a contractor discussing insulation. My mind has to be clear. So quite often this is in the evenings. So it's outside of work and I've had food and I'm sat down and the telly might be on or something and I've got my sketch pad. It might be when I'm on holiday, it might be when I'm at the beach with the kids or something. To sketch freely, yes, your mind does have to be kind of free immediately of all the kind of those constraints. So quite often sketching is a multi-layered thing, and the final sketch that you have might be an overlaying or coming together of 5, 6, 7, 40,
Exactly.
50 sketches. Until
Exactly.
you look at it and you think proportionally that's right.
Yeah.
Um,
When we've been having these battles sort of with sketching, it would take, if you haven't done it for a few months, or in my case, maybe a few years even,
yeah,
it takes a while to get back into it. I mean, you're saying you're sketching a lot, Glenn, and
yeah,
that's you do. It is a little bit like you need to keep it going to be able to
yeah.
have a quality. And it takes me a while to get my arm in, a few
Yes.
hours to.
In that sense, it is quite similar to meditation. It's something that the more you draw and the more you kind of get in that state of
Absolutely.
mind where you're blocking everything off. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a wonderful state to be in. Sketching is
Yeah.
fun
Yeah.
at the end of the day. It's enjoyable. And I mean, we just come up to a slide there that the bottom left is one of the very first sketches we did for a new build project in Bombleston, where we designed these volumetrics. But the first thing in my mind, I knew what the house was going to be. I knew where the volumes were going to be. The bottom left was simply, is it going to be a pitched roof or flat roof? So, you know, the client or anyone else looking at wouldn't know what that inverted black and white sketch was, but to me, it's very clear what that is. And you can see then with the picture above it, how the mono-pitched roof developed from that sketch, and on the right-hand side, how the flat roof version of the same footprint, same design, completely altered the look of the building with the pitched roof. And with this one, we actually presented both options to the client. But I mean, the bottom left, you don't have to sketch well. You don't have to have, you know, years and years of experience of two-point perspective. Sketching can be simply an abstract few lines that mean something to you. And like I said before, something you always revert back to. You know, if you're losing track or you're wandering off or you feel the project's not going the right way, fundamentally, what is it all about?
It's that hook that you talked about again, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's critical. This is simply a sketch showing how with this particular house, I wanted light to come in through various points of the day, in the morning through one aspect, through the evening through another aspect. And that gave us the idea of this X house where the two monopitch roofs were opposing, bringing light in at different times of day and the center looking at different views. But again, just quite a simple axonometric sketch was all that was needed to convey that to the client.
And then, like, maybe this is the point where we start talking about computers. Both of you are taking the projects into various kind of CAD packages. I still think, as I'm sure you do, that, you know, the sketching is fundamental in that process. And hopefully when people, you know, watch this, they'll realize how the pair of you use them in slightly different ways, but actually there's a lot of similarities. But ultimately, they do end up in these kind of computer packages. So do you want to talk to us a little bit about that, Glenn?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, ultimately, we live in the real world. So at some point, you're absolutely right. We have to work that, but that only comes to the point where you know the concept is something that's substantial, something that's poetic, something that's right for the site, something the site deserves, and you know that in your mind. And I think that does come partly through experience, but it comes through intuition as well. I think, you know, if you're starting off or you're a student, you know if something looks good when you look at it, and you know if it doesn't. You know if you keep on you have to carry on working that, or if you've reached a point where, okay, I now need to check. I've reached that stage of concept in my head. I'm now going to measure that against the real world. So that's when we start drawing up on CAD. We start looking at the lengths and the spaces. We start zoning out where all the functions are. I mean, of course, when you're doing the concept prior to this, in my head, I know where the living room is. I know where the bedrooms are going to be, but it hasn't been converted to actual reality. So in CAD, we're working at 1-to-1. You know, you're actually putting the dimensions of the wall, of the window, and then, you know, sometimes it might come up with a concept and it doesn't look how you want it to. So you have to revert back to the sketch and tweak it. But more often than not, it's a hard version, as you see here on the left, of what I was thinking of. This actually was with the roofs going the same way before we flipped it. But yeah, it's really fascinating as an architectural designer, actually seeing the concept suddenly become real. And when you draw it and you pass it on to, we've got a fabulous CGI visualization. But this guy up in Scotland is wonderful, Studio Stride, they're called. Yeah, so he's taken our CAD model, built it up into SketchUp and provided these. And we go back to him with tweaks. And as we're starting to see it, realize, right, that window needs to be bigger, or can you change the cladding to something darker? And there's the whole new design process then of realizing the project.
Yeah, and as you say, the crucial thing is there's sketching's given you an understanding of what the project is, and then when you get into what we're looking at the screen, then yes, you're changing things, but you're not suddenly completely changing things in that sense. You know, the sketching's given you exactly what do you say? You know the concept.
Yeah, the sketch is fundamental throughout the whole process that we revert back to. So this is a development. Actually, the location is something called Almondsbury. If I don't know if you're aware of it, but as you go over the Severn Bridge, on the right-hand side before you get into England, there's a bank of fields and a beautiful village called Almondsbury, with a lovely pub, by the way, overlooking the Severn Estuary. The client specifically came to us for the sort of sustainable style that we take on board with a lot of projects. They wanted the houses to be fairly inconspicuous. So we adopted with these kind of semi-part buried houses into the slope of the landscape, with the grass kind of rolling over the top. So the idea that from far away, all you saw was the sort of slits almost coming out of the mountain. Upside down living, so on the approach it looked like a single story, very inconspicuous, just one wall, and then you go into the space and it opens out with this full height glazing in the living room over the estuary, and then you go down into the bedrooms on the lower floor, which is the right hand image there. That's the lower floor bedroom with a grass roof terrace garden above coming up from the living area. But you can see the difference between the two slides before that. Craig, where it was very loose pen, and
Yeah.
that's not a good sketch at all. It's the loosest kind of few strokes you could possibly do. But when you look at that sketch and look at 3 months later when the CAD guy comes up with the image you now see on your right, you can see the correlation between the two. And we tried hard to stay true to that and not to stray too far away from it.
Now you can see it there. It's it's very kind of it's obviously developed, but you can see the as you said, you need to know the concept, and that's kind of developed in those sketches to get then to where it is
Yeah,
now.
that's the story, the narrative. So that's what
Cool.
they look like from the bottom of the site looking up.
So I think we've got one more project. So this is almost like right the way through your process now, these series of slides, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we can go through these very quickly, actually, because they're just illustrative of everything we've talked about. So from the very loose sketches there at the bottom, model making. That's something that seems to have disappeared over the last 20
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I hadn't done it for a while. And when we were drawing these sketches, this house particularly revolved around a central courtyard that you walked into upon entering the site. So you didn't walk into a porch, you walked into an open courtyard, and all the rooms fed off that with kind of walls at right angles. So to me, it was really important to not go straight from that to CAD. So we decided to go to the old model shop and get some balsa wood and some trees and
Brilliant.
scale miniature people
Love
and
it.
play about with the volumes, protrude them further, make them come back, change the scale of them. And so just by messing about with blocks of wood, really, we were able to develop the sketches into something more real. So you can see here the loose sketch has now gone into a more semi-scaled sketch, top left, down to an actual 2-point perspective, so that would be scaled. And then 2 loose sketches on the right. So we're now taking it into the building, hopefully into something close to reality. Site plan, watercolors. The top right is just how we envisaged the entrance. That was quite an early watercolor that I did that we kept referring to. And then the middle right is how you'd see it from the highway. So it's hidden by the trees, which a lot of our buildings we try to do, really kind of mitigate any visual impact it has. And yeah, and then another view from the south, which no one would ever see apart from the homeowner. That's the south-facing living and bedroom areas.
And then some CAD stuff at the end.
Yeah, and now it's taken to CAD. So we're looking at this almost as a composition, a technical composition of how this house on stilts is going to look proportionally.
Obviously, there's the technical stuff that happens, which is another form of sketching too.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, sketching with builders on site, you're asked to change something because something doesn't quite work, and just the ability to sort of fairly quickly rough something out to convey it. It's all about communication sketching. It's something that we perhaps don't have too much time to expand on now, but yeah, communicating with builders, well, that's a whole new world.
Yeah.
Well, these are just personal for myself. They're not for projects. This is my sort of meditation, if you like. And I'm taking them from sketch. Recently, I've started taking them and copying them into digital format because my ink was fading and I wanted to explore technology. So I'm actually using AutoCAD to recreate my sketches as they are on the sketchpad onto CAD, which I'm finding fascinating, but mostly just for myself, really.
Those are the closer to kind of artworks. They're almost like, minimalist. Some of them kind of, paintings almost. You could see some of those early ones, and that one on the kind of right-hand side. Any questions?
When I used to teach people how to use graphics and illustration software on Apple computers, I really emphasized that before we went on the computer, we had to sketch out our ideas first. And I laboured it all the time because I thought it's so important, because the problem is with people going straight onto a computer is they limit themselves to what they know that computer can do, rather than working out the ideas first, then going to the computer and learning some more about what that computer can do, but using it for that actual project. So I was emphasizing sketching and drawing all the time. Some people resisted, but felt the benefit eventually. You can spend a lot of time on a computer, whereas a sketch is more instant.
That's dead right. I mean, I've certainly encountered situations where we've said to someone, not particularly a young member of staff, said to them, "Okay, can you, tell us what you think, show us what you're thinking." They've come back with a kind of half-rendered, CAD sort of SketchUp type thing, which just looked really poor. And I said to him, "Well, why do you not sketch it?" "Oh, I can't sketch." But actually, the SketchUp thing that he showed us was terrible because he didn't have the technical knowledge to be able to create, free flowing, compound curves or whatever it might be on the computer. So he's limited by his technical skill on the computer. But I feel limited by the confidence to get something across in, you know, a couple of minutes sort of crude sketch, which he could have done.
The sketch is more potent and has more value than a
Yes.
sort of semi-half-hearted flat render. Any employer or tutor critique would much rather see a series of sketches and will not be looking at the quality to, you know, they're not perspectively correct. That's not the issue at this early stage. A few scribbles, a few lines, and pages upon pages of how that's developed would be, you know, tells 1,000 times more of a story than one sort of half-done Photoshop thing.
And you can get more atmosphere.
Absolutely, yeah. It's just it's organic. It's come directly from the mind, as we touched upon earlier. And it just has so much more depth and atmosphere, as you say, Dave.
Yeah, and ironically, even though it'll be loose, it actually gives more often a better sense of reality.
Well, we live in a squiggly world, don't we? We don't live in a straight world.
Yeah.
I think it was Alan Watts who said that. We live in a squiggly world. So yeah, throw away the computers, even a ruler. Just make your drawings loose.
I think that students underestimate how much employers want to see sketches in their portfolios. Even the very, very good students that leave, they still have this, no matter how much you tell them, because they start not believing you at that point, because they've got these beautiful CAD drawings and they've got these beautiful visuals that they spent months kind of tweaking and tweaking and tweaking. And so, but I did the sketch in like 2 minutes. Yeah, but it's amazing. So please put that into your, you know, there's something about the glossiness of a computer, I think.
Yeah.
And we do need them. We, you know, both of you used it. We're not advocating that, you know, you put computers, you know, switch them all off, because we need them. But it's about, you know, enjoying that process. I think it's an addictive process. Glenn, you touched on it then, and I think it is. It's not. It's the feeling and the zone you get into. I think is an addictive kind of thing.
You know, have fun with it. But you need to throw off the shackles and just do it for yourself maybe first. Build up that confidence and that style which is yours, not kind of emulating anyone else or trying to be accurate. Just your own freestyle. Just develop it, enjoy it, and have fun. Thanks,
Maybe
Nick.
to finish off, Glenn, that quote from Le Corbusier would be probably a good place to finish if you can remember it.
I prefer drawing to talking because there's less room for lies. One other thing just came to mind. It was a Paul Klee quote. A sketch is a line that goes for a walk.